Hey guys, welcome to another session of RBTL, or Reading Between the Lines. This is going to be the balance adjustment preview for September 29th. So we got Straze, which is kind of weird. Straze, Ravi, Kayron, Aria, Taeyou, Roana, Blaze, Dingo, Khawana, and Hasol. We got two artifacts going, Magic for Friends, so Fire Mercedes or Mercedes artifact, and then Unfading Memories. So let's go through this. First things first, I think is the Moonlight 5. I think this has sparked a bit of discussion amongst the community. I think there's a lot of heroes that could have been balanced, and Straze not being one of them. In my opinion, actually, Straze didn't really have an issue. Like, he was pickable in the right situation, generally as a last pick or from a very aggressive player. He is definitely one of these, high bulk, high tank, low damage type of counter drafts. So like if someone goes like too bulky, too much healers, too many knights, less damage, then Straze is a pretty good pick me up. I actually think that he, again, like I said, I don't think he had an issue. The penetration rate condition being alleviated, I'll go through that, what I think that means, and that might help in PvE scenarios at the most, but I don't even think that's a real issue. The main PvP aspect to this change is really that his Star Extinction, being his S3, does not trigger a counterattack. Now, I think that overall, like to see Straze being the singular, mind you, the singular Moonlight 5 being adjusted here, I think is a bit of a disappointment. Now I know that a lot of people wanted like something like Top Model Luluka, like some people said ML Haze, Last Rider Crow. I think they all have their areas. Top Model Luluka might be the hardest to use out of like some of the ML5s that people wanted to see buffed. But at the same time, and I saw this on stream chat yesterday that someone said that, well, maybe they don't want Top Model Luluka buffed. I guess from a player perspective, because right now the meta is pretty aggressive in terms of like, you have a lot of advantage if you have like an Athletica, you have an Elfelt, and a Ran and Payra are still pretty good in certain scenarios, see Lilia. So having first turn advantage, especially when you know how to like, complete your draft, I think it's very strong still. So the very fact that Top Model Luluka could have been a potential kind of like an opener, or let's say a secondary opener, it was still a big threat, right? So Top Model Luluka obviously like, starts failing because the pick of RB or revive heroes is not as high as it used to be. And then you have Politis, Celine, and even Taeyou technically being very good at like suppressing Top Model, and then you have Rimuru and stuff like that, and then you have Spectenny, which she can't reach. So there's a lot of stuff that Top Model Luluka could need, but then at the same time, what she had before, self-attack buff, can go into stealth, if on Dignitas Orb, can go through a barrier, so really hard to knock out. S1 does a lot of damage, S3 does a lot of damage, and then like she has full team CR boost, right? So there's like a lot of stuff that if she did get buffed, maybe we would complain about, broken meta and all that stuff. And then the players who don't have the speed seed, so to speak, the RNG to roll speed gear, are just gonna feel worse, right? So right now it is definitely looking like an advantage of players, or rather accounts specifically, that have a lot of speed gear, have a lot of flexibility in moving speed gear around. It is definitely one of the, I would say, the highest advantages in the game at the moment. But that being said, we do have Straze. So his is pretty simple. Skill does not trigger a dual attack. It's counter attack. It's about the same. I mean, I think that is good in some scenarios. I personally don't think that, like, if you're doing it in World Arena, what I realize is that if people pick Straze against you, you're not gonna pick a counter hero necessarily. You might pick up like a Acid or something to snipe him out. You might pick up or you might draft in a way that you have to ban him, right? But at the same time, like, again, he's kind of open. He's not super fast, and generally, if he's gonna do damage, he's sort of squishy. So you have like so many ways to kill him, so many high speed DPS at a aggressive cleave and stuff like that. You have too much that Straze can't deal with, and that's why I feel like this buff, even if you disagree that Straze needed a buff, let's just talk about the buff itself. And I just think that this buff is not super good. Like, if anything, this buff just makes him a bit easier to use in, let's say, arena offense. against like the kind of like the bulky slower team, so like a C-Armin, Rem, like a Bellion or something like that on the defense, or a FCC. FCC's kind of coming back again. So that's like pretty much it. And so I feel like, you know, while it's a decent buff for him, it's not like what would have made him more pickable in my opinion. All right, so that's just my opinion. When I see people like pick Straze against me, it's not like I start putting up Rems and green Armins or something like that. I would already have them for whatever else reason, but Straze would generally be, I wouldn't think about killing him through a counter, let me put it that way, since he does go invincible, right? So that's just me. The penetration rate condition alleviated this because it says all the mechanics are still the same. He still has to have his attack to a certain proportion higher than the target's attack in order to generate up to 100% defense pen. So with this rate alleviated, it probably just means that the condition or the amount of attack he has to supersede is lower. So like the requirements are lower, which can be good because then you could probably increase his speed, which honestly he's just a mixed bag, right? You kind of want speed and damage at the same time. And to most people, to get the right amount of damage, you can't go that fast. So I think if anything, if he's going to be picked up right now into like the aggressive World Arena kind of draft, he's definitely going to have to be faster if this pen is alleviated. But of course, we'll see after the adjustments, like with our data mines and, you know, our geniuses in the Epic Sim community being able to extract that information, like how much more attack do you need? If the attack is much lower, then you can have, you know, crit damage, and then you can have just speed, and he could do what he needs to do. And like I said, he wouldn't suffer as much as he is right now, right? So right now is really like a gear and stat issue mainly, I think. Yeah. So let's talk about the RGB. The first one is Fire Ravi. I think Fire Ravi's buff is okay. All right, it's not as big as I think like the Alencia and Shu back in the day. When we saw them, it's just like, okay, we got new bruisers that are gonna make their way into the meta. I think Ravi naturally was going to already be a bruiser that people will start thinking about, because she's kind of self-sustaining and she's fire element. With the current way that World Arena works with the frenzy, if you hit something that is you're not elemental advantage, or actually even not even elemental neutral, if you have elemental disadvantage, the advantageous side receives 30% less damage, right? So that's huge. This is also, I think, one of the reasons why the World Arena season this season is a lot less predictable. Yes, you have your meta heroes, but you actually see a lot more RGB heroes mixed into the bag. So this means that the strategy for drafting actually becomes more like a rock paper scissors kind of thing, and that's good to see. With Alencia being very strong, it was very natural that Fire Ravi come back into the game. I was already saying that before, and then Senya now being very disgusting. So what we have here, I think, is a decent way. It's not a perfect way to deal with Senya, but 100% I think that her usefulness is gonna be way better dealing with Senya, dealing with Alencia, dealing with green heroes in general. And so I think that her buff is right on time. Now, whether or not the buff itself is really effective, we'll have to wait and see, but I definitely think that if you have the gear, you should build Fire Ravi, especially if you're competitive in World Arena. That's my thinking. In terms of Fire Ravi starting now with 40 Fighting Spirit means that she gets to stack up to the S3 a lot quicker. If I'm not mistaken, I have to, like, you know, I'd have to look at her skill description again. If I'm not mistaken, she can go into S3 in one hit, or at least receive one hit, or she does one S1 and then she goes straight into S3. Whereas before, I think she required 2, if I'm not mistaken, to be able to do the S3 right away. So having the S3 pretty early is very advantageous for her, because it does set up some stuns. And like part of Ravi's kit is that she's kind of like a snowballing hero, and she gets stronger over time. And now she's just gonna be like way stronger right off the bat, right? So increases the attack. Like we already had this before. Attack was at 15, but effectiveness was at 10. That means if you stack up to 5 times, whether she does the S1, whether she can't get the S1, so if you counter, you gain the what is it called, the fighting spirit, and it triggers her passive, Demon's Blood, I believe that's what it's called. And then if she gets hit, she also triggers it. So it was really quick to get her stacked. So now with 15% effectiveness, in my opinion, this is a pretty big game changer. A lot of players, you know, didn't really think. No, well, I wouldn't say a lot, but some people really kind of negated that Alencia's Mind's Eye had that funneled 50% effectiveness, and we can actually see that she's very, very strong that way, right? Like, you would now have to run everyone at 150 ER to be able to resist Alencia, and that's just, you know, a no-go. There's one reason why Aria is just kind of unusable as long as Alencia is on the field, because even if Aria has the ER to resist Alencia, even if she does, your whole team is stripped, right? So with that kind of knowledge, Ravi getting 15% effectiveness and stackable up to 5 times, meaning that we can get 75% attack buff, which she had before, but then 75% effectiveness buff, which is pretty nuts because she has a stun on the S1. She can apply burns. If you go with her EE now, the burn one is gonna be unbuffable. I don't know if I like that myself, but I'll talk about that when we get there. But 75 is no joke, right? So 75%, she can stun some Soul Weavers that lack ER even, or even Knights that are at 100 ER. So 75 effectiveness, very, very strong. Everything else is the same. And then the Devil Drive, they changed it where that the raw damage is decreased, but the increased damage with defense pen comes into play. Now, because of like the nature of defense pen, obviously, you know, it lowers the value of defense to whatever degree you're at, right? So like whether you have really high defense or really low defense, like penetrating that defense makes a huge deal. So I'm gonna assume that on paper it's going to look like the damage isn't too different. So in terms of if they lower the damage mod, they're compensating with the 50% defense pen. But I think in actual practice, in terms of output, I think this carries a lot more weight just because of defense buffers, because of just naturally how defense kind of works in the game, and especially when most bruisers that she's gonna fight are going to be high-ish defense. And when I say defense buff, of course I am talking straight about like Alencia. So I think this is to counteract that. Now one can say that, oh, with the raw damage, you know, it can make up for it if they just increase the raw damage, but I think this is the better way. So in case that somehow Ravi gets really, really OP. The thing is with Fire Ravi, you can actually put her on a pen set, and then now she's going to be a hero that is able to S1 pen and also S3 pen. So while I know about this buff coming, I think I'm going to look for a counter Ravi build with penetration set as my go-to build. So I think overall her buff, again, if you look at this, maybe you don't think this is a huge deal, but I said this about Edward when Edward got buffed, before even Edward got buffed, I said that as long as Epic 7 releases more and more heroes that like either a AoE debuff so they can't stop themselves from debuffing, or a lot of green heroes that do debuffs, or you know, whatever the pool of heroes become, Edward's value itself can go up, even if on paper right now he doesn't deal with a lot of stuff well. Although now with his buff and then people experimenting him, I think he's fine in the meta. And this is the same thing with Fire Ravi. She becomes stronger when more green heroes become stronger, right? So this is just how it kind of works right now. So I definitely think that Ravi's buff is okay. It's just in time, and I think they really know, like, oh, Senya, Alencia, they're kind of running rampant. We got to get a fire hero. So I think really what they were doing was, so we got to get a fire hero that isn't super squishy, that can deal with some of these green meta heroes to kind of tip the scales, and therefore, you know, a la balance patch. The burning EE was never really good option in my opinion, because the chance for it to burn was already very low, and then on top of the fact that even with her passive Demon's Blood scaling the attack, her attack was never like, let's say, a carrot. But with attack buff, of course, I think that could be good. But just keep in mind that, of course, Ravi by nature is like a self-sustaining bruiser, so she could really carry a fight, you know, especially if they go low damage, high bulk. Like, Fire Ravi can, I think, realistically solo. Now, even with this exclusive equipment buff to the unbuffable, it's 70% chance, so that does increase in value. But I think I personally would still go with the self-cleanse one, especially because I still think best in slot on Fire Ravi would be something like Sigurd's Scythe. Like, so you can hold the S3 until you need a big heal, and then you know, start killing them off. So I think Fire Ravi overall is still really good. Exclusive equipment change I think is natural. I just, like I said, I don't think the burn was really strong. So this is a nice change, it's nice to have. Perhaps really in some scenarios it could be good. So for example, if she applies the unbuffable, although 30% chance not to happen, could apply to something like a Senya, right? So like Senya, even if she has 3, it'd be like super low value because she can't even get the counter. So like stuff like that I think is really good, and into Alencia, so she can't get Mind's Eye. So like maybe you want the self cleanse for other fights, but if you're taking her into just those green heroes, then I think this EE's buff is, you know, really targeting those two. Like I said, the targeting those two meta greens, right? Kayron, also kind of interesting. I was reading this and I was like, okay, because Kayron by nature is still a hero that is kind of like high damage and kind of functions like a Straze, right? But Kayron on counter has always been like a thing when people start picking up on it. Like there's immortality. If he's the last one alive, and you know they had no choice but to keep attacking him before his actual turn is up, then he's immortal and he gets the counter. It's going to be really devastating. Now, for those of you who didn't know, Kayron actually used to function like this in terms of this buff. It was a bug. Well, I'm going to say quote unquote bug. But Smilegate nerfed him back. So in the past, when Kayron was released, when he's on counter, he actually does the AoE if he's buffed. But now, but then they removed it, so he only countered with single target, and now this becomes a feature. So he's actually back to where he was. And just in case if there's new players that didn't know the context, he used to counter with an AoE. So Void Slash, when this skill is used, it is not triggered by a dual attack, and the caster has a buff. This skill changes into an attack that targets all enemies. So of course, this is obvious that only dual attacks doesn't trigger. That means counter can. Grant immortality, and increase invasion. So this part to me is like, this is okay, I guess, but to me it's sort of situational. With the fact that you get evasion and then you get immortality, really what you're trying to do is really just evade a strip, right? So I don't know, I personally think that like that kind of has a bit of low value. Now I don't know what his best in slot artifact would be at this point. Some people are thinking the Urvalin artifact, a double-edged decrescent. Shepherd of the Hollow I think would be one of his best no matter what anyway. Increased evasion plus that will always guarantee 70%. But the double-edged decrescent, so Urvalin's artifact, will also increase the chance of countering in terms of a separate roll, just like counter set, if they miss him, right? But it's a 30% chance to proc it, and that's only if they miss. So it's a 30 on 30, right? Oh, sorry, 70 on 30. I think his buff is okay. I think compared to Ravi, I would definitely say that if I'm stuck in a situation where I have to match up with like an Alencia, a Senya, I think I would probably go with the Ravi route as a counter, not Kayron. But Kayron could now possibly function well as kind of like how BBK did, at least in the last season, as an anti-cleave hero. I don't think BBK works that well anymore. A lot of heroes now just strip her, or have soul burn, access to soul burn, ignore resist, sort of access to soul burn, ignore resist type of cleave. So BBK's value went down. A lot of people started rebuilding BBK to be not high ER BBK, full damage BBK only on certain scenarios, and I think Kayron also can work in that as well now, right? So I don't think Kayron needs ER, although if you wanted to put him on counter, like a counter BBK, he has added value because now he does AoE. So there is I think pros and cons to however you build your Kayron. At the end of the day, it would be like whatever Kayron build you build, if you use him, I think counter is going to be best in slot if yours is not already on counter. But that being said, I think that counter on him will still only make him more usable in very niche scenarios, especially in World Arena. Okay, so that's what I think about his buff. AoE of course threatening if you hit him, but it's just like a lot of issues with that is that, you know, they're not 100% forced to hit him unless you have to use your AoE skill, right? Okay, so anyways, so Aria buff. Aria buff, I think they misunderstand why she's not as good. At least that's my opinion. When I'm reading this, I don't think that they understood Aria's issue or why she needed a buff. So Aria last season, before Alencia got buffed, was quite strong because like Hua-Yang running rampant. Well, Shu and Alencia got buffed at the same time. Shu dealt with Hua-Yang on a different level, but Aria was still pretty good. But when Alencia got buffed with Shu, that put Aria kind of out, and then Shu kind of like superseded that versus Hua-Yang specifically. Although Alencia does technically counter both Aria and Shu. But Aria, I don't think her buff really fixes where she's supposed to be, but of course it is a buff straight up. So first things first is that when it's not the caster's turn, the effect chance is increased to 20%, so that means a 70% to grant blind, hit chance down for 1 turn. So that's nice because yeah, this pairs well with her synergy because she does self-counter buff. But that still means that Aria still needs what she needed before, as in she needed a ER. So no matter if you ran the speed set Aria with lower damage or the lifesteal damage Aria, you would still want high ER. And because of Alencia, because of other strip potentials, your ER might have to be even slightly tuned up, just slightly. This being said, the increase is, the damage has been increased as well. So free damage buff, so they probably thought that it was quite low. Aria was an interesting hero to boot when I initially reviewed her, that she had a lot going for her in terms of like high damage output, because she had free crit rate, so you see here in 30%, and then as her health decreased, she actually got more crit damage. So she naturally just kind of functioned well. Now she doesn't even need that condition. She just has increased damage. I'm just assuming that the increased damage here will be equivalent to this, but it doesn't require her health to be low. That being said, again, if they don't have Alencia or they don't have a team-wide strip, then I think it's pretty safe. The barrier strength has also been increased, so outside of anything that does AoE, outside of like people who can strip like a Bellion S1 or an Alencia S3, this is definitely high value. So like it might be way harder to knock out her targets so that she remains that we call it a tank even technically. She functions like a tank, right? So puts everyone in stealth but like funnels all the damage into her. And then to knock out the stealth heroes, they have to do AoE, but stealth cuts the damage down by half, so 50% damage mitigation if they're using AoE onto stealth heroes. But yeah, see here, is anything else? Yeah, so that's pretty much it. I think overall, like Alencia aside, this is a good buff for Aria, makes her a lot stronger. But with Alencia in, her buff doesn't really deal with that, right? So as I mentioned before, the strip is not about her counter strip getting stripped. It's about the team she's supporting, their buffs getting stripped by Alencia. That's the main issue. That's why she fell off. Taeyou, I had to read this twice, but I actually think he can be usable. This is what I think. So I feel like, you know, originally he was like to deal with Ran and maybe Peyra. Because Ran and Peyra are not as easy to pick anymore, and when I say not as easy, I'm not talking about the people who can run 320 speed full damage Ran. 320 speed full damage Ran on RNL is still very cancer. But not many people can get that kind of stat line. So Rand's effectiveness into the meta was already kind of weak because Edward, because Dilibet, and then people are able to race with Sid, Wanderer Silk, and all that stuff, and yada yada yada. So there was a lot of stuff going on that Rand first pick was not the most powerful thing anymore. So Taeyou here, I'm looking at Taeyou's buff as if it's not a Rand deterrent, as if it's not a what do you call it, not a para deterrent, but really just again, when I originally reviewed Taeyou, I was thinking that he would have that slot where like Politis and Celine was a threat if you use a non-attack skill, right? So I think now he's a lot more effective in that role. Now that being said, because he did turn out to be really bad in terms of to get the right stats that he needed, his damage wasn't even good. So that was a disappointment for when he was actually released in practice. But now he dispels all buffs. So instead of 2 buffs, all buffs, increase cooldown of the highest attack by 1 turn, increases the caster's speed as well, and then when enraged, oh sorry, we should look at the awakened version. When enraged, where am I? Okay, so yeah, so grants attack buff and speed to cast for 2 turns. When enraged, ignores effect resist. So this is tornado sweep. Now in his passive, it's if he has enrage, and the passive is that he has to have someone on the opponent's side do a non-attack skill, he will become enraged. So if they do that, he will become enraged, and then he will, if he does tornado sweep, he will ignore defect resist. He also grants a skill null on his passive too, if I'm not mistaken. So in terms of that kind of supportory role, he's got it. The issue with this to me is that then this kind of shows what his usefulness is, right? Like he's technically like a Politis, but then can't actually blind unbuffable strip the opponent. Like he can strip when he does these S3, but like does he get the turn? With Taeyou's artifact, he cuts 10% instead of something like Astral Guide, so Politis is 30%. So like, does he even get the turn if he does this? I think on paper the buff is a great buff. It seems like it can do a lot, but it's just like conditional wise, like there's no increased damage on his buff, so it's like they don't want him to become a damage dealer. They don't want him to even become a damage dealer, whereas when they originally showcased, it's like when he's enraged, his S1 does like an extra attack and it does like a lot of damage. But it's not the case here. No buff there, so I'm not quite sure if he's usable. I'm not quite sure what kind of role or what kind of team comp he would be in, because like, yes, I think he would do his job well, but because it's only to 1 DPS, I'm not quite sure how long that would last. So we'll have to see how Taeyou works out. I don't know if this will cause him to be dusted off and used, although I just think that his buff is a decent buff. Okay, so the buff compared to the buff itself. Roana as well, the buff is like, you know, she was always strong in certain fights, and almost a force ban, and this buff in my opinion is kind of like they didn't know who to buff. Maybe they didn't want to, you know, make another unit kind of useless, have another useless buff, so let's just pick a unit that already kind of works and then give her like a slight upgrade. So I personally don't think that this barrier on Roana will make her more usable, because it doesn't necessarily function like a regular Soul Weaver, where you'd be like, okay, she's like a Destina, where she would have her own turn cycling and healing. Especially if you're on Stella Harpa, then she has no healing except the S3 and her passive, right? So it feels like this buff will definitely serve her better in terms of the, like, basically she has access to barrier on all skills except the passive. The S3 grants the revive and then a barrier. Barrier is proportional to caster's max health. I mean, this might be a massive barrier, we'll have to see. But let's just say it's 10%, even 15% of the of her health or something like that. Like, we're talking about like 2,000, maybe 2,500. Like, it's not nothing. It's just that I'm not quite sure if this will make her more pickable. In the areas where they're already, you know, doing AoE counter or AoE extra attack, she's already functioning really well with or without this barrier. So I feel like if they were going to buff her, may as well make it kind of a bit more different, I think. I personally don't think that this is a huge deal. Yeah. So like if she had like a cast revive skill, kind of like a Maid Chloe, in my opinion, it's not even that broken, to be honest, because she doesn't have Maid Chloe's kind of extra like functionality, like CR boost team if target stun on S1, continual healing in terms of the passive healing to two targets and stuff like that. She is very like she's very passive, right? She's sitting back and waiting for stuff to happen. So I feel like they could have kind of tuned that a bit, but I suppose our Soul Weaver roles, like, it's good to have her buffed. Blaze Dingo. All right, let's talk about this. So I was looking at this. I think this is really cool. Blaze Dingo was one of these cleavers that some people built, some people used. I personally, I tried him before, but never in World Arena. I think he's a lot harder to set up. But with the Soul Weaver Frenzy, at least this season, having 7, and he has a very fast base speed, is there a spot for him? Maybe, because now you can actually defense break for 2 turns on his AoE skill. So if you have a Soul Burn, you could buff yourself with a greater attack buff with his EE, and then you go into this AoE defense break, not too shabby. It might be even usable in situations where to trigger what's his name, ML Pavel, Commander Pavel, not Blaze Dingo alone, right? Because if he critical hits, he activates punishment against a random enemy. That counts as an extra attack, especially his Awakened version. It's not an extra turn, so he's not gonna trigger. What's his name? Commander Pavel. Sorry, I'm kind of tired. Commander Pavel by himself, but if he's usable with this AoE defense break, like very solid, like could be paired with something like an Edda too, right? So Soul Burn, push up Edda, so somehow push him. Soul Burn, his Soul Burn is a non-attack skill, pushes up Edda, and then he can do a AoE defense break or something like that. That would be kind of cool. So like full team wipe. So I think that the AoE defense break on Blaze Dingo's kit as an entirety is very strong. I think it's very nice. Now do note that of course the defense break happens after, so he's not going to benefit from that in terms of a cleaver, but he's definitely there to set up another cleaver. So that's very nice. Khawana. This is kind of interesting. So instead of like you have to start drafting or using all fire elemental heroes, it does apply the effect to fire elemental heroes. Now, I was actually killed by Khawana in World Arena the other day. Now, it was my bad. I got too cocky with my speed gear, and I allowed the person to have Fire Siren and Fire Shiri without banning any of the speed imprints. So there were 28 speed imprint up above my fastest opener, so that was my bad. And I think Khawana has Sid's stats, so that means if you have the gear 300 speed Sid, put on a 300 speed Khawana, and I think you got some stuff going on. But of course, she really functions on benefiting the actual like fire elemental heroes on the team, increasing the combat readiness, granting the skill null and stuff like that. So she's kind of like a niche pick, but for certain styles of play, I can definitely see her being used. Hasol was an interesting one for me to read. This was sort of how I reacted to the ROL buff on the last balance patch, I believe. And now we already have a preview that ROL will be getting a specialty change probably soon. So like with the specialty change of ROL, a Knight Light Elemental 3-star ML, like will we start seeing more of these Knights? Like they have different roles. I feel like Epic 7 designs Knights a lot better than they do Soul Weavers. I feel like Soul Weavers, I mean, I guess like their main function is healing, but like they were trying something different with something like Sharoon, right? And I feel like that kind of flopped. So I think like Soul Weavers, like we have the Singelicas, we have the ML Haste, we have like the DNs, Amelia, Destina, like they all like have different functions. It's pretty cool. But I definitely think that the Knights, they have a lot more like passives or supportery aspects instead of just saying that, oh, the support is to heal. And I kind of like the fact that they're going through this and maybe testing out early mechanics or early mechanical concepts in 3-star knights so that they won't be OP, and then that also won't cause riots being like, oh, you know, like, you know, we have to pull all these ML5s in order to have these OP knights and blah 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 blah. Golden Boys era. It was really good during that time to have like the Last Rider Crow, a Tywin, and all that stuff. So I'm just thinking off the top of my head, as a game designer, am I designing these knights slowly to see how their, you know, specific mechanics work out, you know? And okay, so let me just go through this. So when used on the caster's turn, so no longer does. So because she's a knight, she can hold what's it called, Elbrus, and so that, like, you know, while she doesn't necessarily have any damage mitigation outside of this, which I'll talk about, Elbrus could be interesting. So 500 fixed damage regardless whether or not the attack hits. It's kind of lowish in that aspect. But maybe not Elbrus, maybe you have her on counter set. Maybe counter set is the way to go, right? Damage dealt proportional to the caster's max health. Probably won't be too crazy. Healing is decreased. Wait, why does it say healing is decreased? Oh, I see. Recovers health of the caster. Okay, there you go. Okay, my bad. Yeah, okay, so decrease there. Oh, I see. Probably just because they think that counter aspect is too good. I don't know how I feel about that. I feel like that is unnecessary nerf. I don't think they need to do that unless the heal at the moment is really high, which I don't know because she's a 3-star, and she's not really used. So Blade of Vengeance before increased combat radius of the caster by 30%, increased the fixed damage of Swift Cut by 1000. Fixed damage could stack up to 4 times. Oh, okay, I see why. I see why the healing has to be decreased. Okay, so this is the only damage mitigation that she has innate in her kit. So I was saying before, like, ROL has escort buff, which means that you can take out Aureus. But the issue, of course, with escort buff is that you get stripped. Now they're going for a different mechanic here. When an ally suffers a counterattack, decrease the damage suffered by 25%. So almost a proof of valor level and way higher than C. Armin in terms of the damage mitigation. However, conditional, it is only counterattack damage. So that gives her sort of a lower, I mean, it's a nice to have, but it's just like, this is what I mean by, like, I think they're like really trying to prototype some of these mechanics and see if they could be applied in a greater scale to a 5-star when that can apply. So I kind of like this thinking process. I don't know if on like functionally that's really strong. I feel like specialty change Pillis also had these things where it's like she's dealing with counterattacks and all that stuff. So that was kind of nice to see on Pillis, right? But damage suffered, yeah. So if she has Aureus and you have this on counter, they're hardly doing any damage to whoever she's protecting, right? So when one or more damage reduction effect is granted, only the strongest apply. So yes, it doesn't stack with like a proof of valor, especially if when it's at max stack. After an enemy counterattacks, increase the combat range by 25%. So instead of 30, it's 25, but also increases the damage for Swift Cut and Punishing Strike by 1000. So the fixed damage increased effect can stack up to 4 times. So yeah, I think realistically, you like, it's really obvious that you want to bring her into high counterattack teams. Now, whether or not that counterattack is guaranteed type of counter or RNG type of counter, that is obviously you know, something that's interesting. Like, I'm seeing this as like she might be decent into like what's her name, ML Celine, because she has fixed damage and it can stack up to 4 times. It's quite easy to chonk down ML Celine. But of course, like as a knight, okay. So I'm not talking about the DPS that she's supporting, but it could be a play. ML Ken is not super big anymore, but I'm talking about heroes that you're guaranteed to trigger counterattack. So But anyways, like if you could get this stack up, you would get it up to 4,000. And then top of this, so I mean the fixed damage is actually pretty huge if you can get it stacked up that high. But of course it does read that if you have to get the counterattack in order to increase this fixed damage, right? Yeah, so I think that's the case. So I think overall kind of interesting. Punishing Strike, we look at the after version. It's AoE, attacks all enemies with a secret skill. Additionally, plus 1 turn cooldown, yeah. Damage dealt increase, but additionally 500 fixed damage. So but it's stackable, right, from her passive. So you can imagine like an AoE that does up to 4,500 fixed damage. That's pretty scary. Increased defense for all allies, so she has that aspect as well, and then barrier for herself for 3 turns. The damage dealt, barrier strength proportional to the caster's max health. After suffering counterattack, decreases skill cooldowns by 1 turn. Actually, you know what? That's actually insanely good. Like, I feel like she has maybe less protection than someone like Pillis. Maybe, slightly. But also has defense buff. I really like this. I actually really like this hero. I liked ROL from last time, but like I said, needed a specialty change. I want Hasol to get a specialty change. I think this is a very nutty kit. And again, it would be very, very specific. You would have to draft her as a late knight if you're going to use her as like a damage mitigation option. So draft your DPS and support in terms of like attack buff or cleanser early, and then DPS, and then late draft knight if they choose too much counter. This is actually really cool. I like this a lot, actually. I'm just thinking if she has actually higher stats, this could be, in terms of like what's on the meta right now, this could be decent into like something like Senya even, right? Senya is right now one of the heroes that can guarantee a counterattack too, right? And because this is straight up damage mitigation, it can mitigate Senya's damage. Although I'm not quite sure. Let me know in the comments down below if you guys know this answer. I think it's the case, right? That something like the artifact proc also gets reduced in damage. So I'm just thinking about Huayang into Proof of Valor A Ravi's. I think it does get reduced in damage. So it should be the same for Senya's Spear of... what's that called? Whatever, the Spear artifact. It should reduce the damage. Now, I'm doing this with like my eyebrows kind of raised up. I'm not 100% sure. But again, if you know that in the comments down below, let me know. Because I think if Hasol gets a specialty change and is able to get increased stats, and heck, if she has more functionality, I think she's pretty loaded. I just feel she's like pretty loaded. Extra, like the fixed damage, AoE, it can actually chonk down Senya's quite hard too, right? I think that she has a lot of potential, and I like her kit. I feel like she's a fun hero. But again, you would have to ideally bring her into a high counter team that hopefully does not actually rely on RNG counter. I think Green Armin would be pretty good to bring her into as well. But you need like some really good support around her. Anyways, talking about the artifacts now. So Magic for Friends, definitely huge. I think a huge buff. The damage mitigation is already solid, 30% instead of 25%, and it's critical hit only. But the big one I think is this: will not activate upon death. So if those of you who are familiar with Fire Mercedes and you have Magic for Friends, or fighting against defense teams, like Mercedes is one of the meta defense heroes in Guild War for like at least 2 seasons. It's plentiful in Arena as well, just because the RNG and high damage aspect of her is pretty good. But Magic for Friends has always been a thing. Even if you played against her, played against her in World Arena, has always been like a really feels bad RNG hero, especially when she doesn't function, in terms of like proccing the Magic for Friends exactly on the turn that she dies. Assuming she got hit once, got hit twice, and it never procced, and then on death it procs, and then when she wakes up or when she gets revived, it won't proc again. But now that this won't activate upon death, it gives her more chances to actually activate the Magic for Friends for the dimensional rupture. So that's very, very nice. It's a nice buff for her. So she never, in my opinion, never had an issue being used. But with Magic for Friends artifact buffed, she's now going to be more used than she was before. Or at least if you use her the same amount, or won't change the amount that you use her, she'll at least be more usable. right? So Unfading Memories, this is the big one. So at this time right now, we have one more week for the DN banner. She made a quick return since that she was already like released, I think like January or February, but because of the I think because of the E7WC skin as well as the fact that she's so meta right now, it's definitely, you know, time for Epic 7 to cash in, so to speak. Unfading Memories was one of the saltiest artifacts. It had not been functional for at least what, like 4 DN rotations now, because she's returned quite a lot. As one of the first limited heroes in Epic 7, her return rate as a limited hero has been the highest out of everyone. And then this banner including will add that to at least 5 or 6 times now that I'm counting, if I'm not mistaken. This artifact has always been trash. Now, whether or not this artifact is good now, here's my thoughts. So the 2% increase on the total health. So we're talking about the max health. So 10% instead of 8. That is okay. The issue with this artifact as compared to something like the Guardian Ice Crystals, so Amelia's limited artifact, is that this artifact still requires the hero to get a turn. So in terms of, like, let's say Amelia or Destina, or heck, even Ruel on the Guardian Ice Crystal artifact, or like DJB, actually, DJB is one of go-to artifact is also that, is that artifact serves to heal quite massively for one, but it serves to heal when the Soul Weaver doesn't have a turn. So that's a big thing that we should keep in mind why that artifact is so strong. Yes, you get a 15% effect resistance. This is 25%. But I don't think you should be fooled by this in terms of like how this artifact functions versus that one. Although this is 10%, up to 10% AoE heal on your allies is not nothing, especially when you have a pool of heroes around your Soul Weaver that has around 20,000 HP. You're getting a 2,000 heal. Functionally, I think on paper, like if it's AoE heal, including the Soul Weaver herself or himself, it is going to be a 40% heal every time you do a non-attack skill. Versus something like DN's Rod, using Rod or Amaryllis, probably the best in slot for her, is 24% to the lowest HP. So in terms of effective healing, you of course are getting more healing from this. But it's like, is that going to be game changing? So in terms of, should you put this on a DN? I'm half-half. So I feel like Guardian Ice Crystals is just a stronger overall Soul Weaver artifact, and like I said before, it's a passive artifact that still heals even when the Soul Weaver cannot get the turn, like they're not fast enough, or the turn cycling is just not correct, the turn order is not correct or something, you can't heal on time. That artifact can save you. And for those of you who didn't know, Guardian Ice Crystals, if you have 2 heroes that have it on the field, the effect is doubled in terms of, let's say you have DJB and you have an Amelia or whatever, and your Aros gets hit under 50%, both of their artifacts actually heal, so he gets double the heal. It's quite massive in terms of the effectiveness of that artifact over something like this. I don't believe that this is going to be best in slot artifact for DN, although I think that this could be a decent artifact for DN. The reason is because like DN, like unless you run a slower one, 25 effect resistance is a ton of stats. This is one trend I am seeing Epic 7 like utilizing as one of their ways to make artifacts better, or buffing them, instead of buffing the actual mechanic or the actual effect of the mechanic itself. So for example, Alensa Nox's Wrath, so Alencia's artifact, got buffed with 15% crit rate, and that immediately made it skyrocket in terms of usefulness. Wind Rider, and what else am I thinking? Time Matter. These artifacts were like decent in terms of certain conditions, but they added additional stats even before some of the secondary conditions are met. And so I'm definitely seeing a trend where Smilegate is definitely doing this. And you know, don't get me wrong, 25% effect resistance. Right now, this is I think the highest ER you can get on an artifact. Shamadra's Staff I think being the second, being 20% if I'm not mistaken. So I think like, you know, overall, if your DN is lacking stats, and especially in ER, this might be a good pick-me-up for her. And it's not like she doesn't heal, right? Like this artifact can still heal, and it's AoE. It's just that you'll really never know with a DN, right? Like whether or not to put her on Rod, put her on Guardian Ice Crystals, put her perhaps even on this artifact now. There's going to be a lot of competing. But I do want to say this, that if you do have Unfading Memories, this is a decent Soul Weaver artifact to use, especially if you don't have enough Guardian Ice Crystals. So I can think of like DJB potentially using this as like, because his S2 is also a non-attack skill, he can heal with this now, right? So he doesn't necessarily need just the S1 to heal. He can heal with this on the S2, on the S3, and his S1 can heal. Destina can also use this, I suppose, but because Destina is like a slower hero, so probably not as good. So I definitely think that my thinking is that Guardian Ice Crystal is probably best in slot for healers that are kind of slower and are more sit back. But I think it will always be good even if it's on a fast Soul Weaver. It's just conditional. And then this artifact I think would be higher value for Soul Weavers that one, need the effect resist of course, but also have a lot of non-attack skills and are hopefully decently fast. But like I said, it's like more of, if you only have one Guardian Ice Crystals, or maybe one is max and other is plus 15, or maybe you have two max limit broken, if you have Unfading Memories, now this is something that you can definitely look into, and that's where I would put this artifact. It would definitely not, I think, replace Rod in terms of DN, but it won't necessarily also be the best in slot like versus Guardian Ice Crystal. It depends on your style of play, depends on what kind of artifacts you have access to, but like I said, this at least to me becomes a useful artifact, although I probably wouldn't wail on it. So that's just my opinion on this, and I think that's the last one for this patch. Yeah. So they do have a note here saying that the next patch is going to start after the RTA season is over. So they are definitely trying to avoid the catastrophe that they have done in the past, what, 5-6 seasons, where they released the balance patch and limited heroes that are broken on the last week of World Arena. So they're doing this, getting this out of the way early. And I would say that overall this balance patch is honestly what it says. It's a balance patch. I don't foresee any of the heroes buff being super OP. But definitely it tips the skill back to like allowing Alencia and Senya to run less rampant, although I still think that they're going to be picked for quite a while. And a couple fun heroes. I definitely think Hasol is interesting. And that's it. That's my thoughts on the entire balance patch. Let me know what you guys think in the comments down below. Again, my question for the my questions asked in the video. What do you guys think about the balance patch? Are you excited to build anyone? Let me know in the comments down below. I'm going to end this for the video recording. If you guys have Discord, check out the Discord server. Follow me on Twitter. Subscribe to YouTube if you haven't. And as always, thank you guys for watching. And I'll see you guys on the next Reading Between the Lines.